be looking at a word you probably have all heard before called Elohim, and what that means. And so please, will you give your attention to the video? Matt, if you could dim the lights while I play the video.
People think about the story of the Bible. They think of a story about God
that appears throughout the Bible and plays a really important role.
Right. Spiritual beings, angels, demons, and the like.
Right. And in the Bible, they inhabit the heavenly realm, which is parallel to our earthly reality and actually overlaps with it.
Now, all of these spiritual beings have their own unique characteristics.
But here's what's fascinating. The biblical authors have one word that can refer to all the inhabitants of the spiritual realm. In Old Testament Hebrew, the word is Elohim, and in New Testament Greek, it's Theos. But here's the thing. This word gets translated in lots of different ways depending on which being is referred to. Angels, gods with a lowercase g, or even God with a capital G.
Wait, so one word can refer to any of these beings?
Yeah. It's because Elohim is a category title. It can designate any spiritual being that belongs to the heavenly realm.
Okay, a title, not a name. Like the word mom.
Yeah, right. The word mom can refer to lots of really different kinds of people, but they all share in common the same role in a family. And then let's say a group of brothers and sisters are talking, and one says, hey, it's mom's birthday. They're using the title like it's a name.
But it would be clear that they're referring not to any mom, but their mom.
Yes, and the same goes for the biblical authors. They called their God Yahweh, which is the name revealed to Moses. But they also sometimes refer to him with the category title Elohim, using it like a name, because they all know who they're referring to.
Okay, but don't the biblical authors think that Yahweh's in a class of his own, not like any other?
They do, which is why they say things like Yahweh is the Elohim of Elohim, that is, the chief Elohim among all the others. Or they'll say there's no Elohim beside Yahweh, meaning no other spiritual being compares to him, because only he is the ruler and creator of all things.
Okay, I'm following, but I thought the Bible taught monotheism, which means there's just one God.
Well, the biblical authors are claiming that among all of the spiritual beings out there, only one is the source and creator of all things, including the Elohim. That's biblical monotheism, that one Elohim, Yahweh, is above all other Elohim, that is, the other spiritual beings. Now, with all that said, we are ready to learn more about who these other Elohim are and how they fit into the biblical story.
All right, thank you, Matt.
Question.
Yes.
This isn't very close to that, but the use of words, that Jewish words. So if you say shalom, that means peace.
Right.
God's peace.
Right.
If you say shalom, shalom.
Is peace, rest. Yeah, peace, peace. Yeah. What about it?
I've just heard it used that way.
Yeah, yeah. Hebrewism, there's a lot of, we call them Hebraisms, by the way, if you're looking for a fancy word. A lot of Hebraisms out there, and they are, it's a Semitic language, so they have kind of some different things. Like, if I say, hey, what do you say back? Hi, or hey, right? But if I say shalom, they would say, malach aleim, I'm with you. Okay, so it's kind of like this, it's this two-part greeting of shalom. So if I say shalom, shalom, what am I saying? I'm speeding up the process. Okay, and so that's kind of where that's coming from. So you don't have to say the response back. And so that's kind of where that modern day shalom comes from. The fact of the matter is, shalom, it's one of these words we don't talk very much about, but it doesn't just mean, peace as in an absence of war. Okay, we don't have shalom because we're not at war with Canada. Okay, it is a true peace with God, an end to all hostility. Okay, that's what shalom means. It's like this end of hostility. But yeah, anyway, we'll come back to that another time. But let's jump into the word Elohim. How many of you have heard the word Elohim before? Yeah, all of us, right? And we always thought we knew what it meant, didn't we? When you say Elohim, you instantly assume we're meaning who? God. Yeah, we think Elohim is a name. It is not a name. It is a title. The same way when we say God, is God a title or a name?
Yes.
Yes, that's the problem. When I say God amongst you all, you know exactly which God I mean, don't you? But aren't there a lot of gods out there? Yeah. Well, the word God comes from the Greek word theos, okay? And the word theos is the Greek translation of Elohim. Now, the problem is, we because we have been so trained to hear Elohim as who? The high God, okay, Yahweh. We sometimes miss the fact that there are truly other gods. Okay, there are these other spiritual beings out there who are inhabiting the world. When I say false god, do you instantly assume it's a real entity, a real being? No. See, this is the problem in our postmodern or our modernistic world. When there's only one God, right? We only think of God, the Father. We don't think of all the other gods. But guess what? There are all other gods out there. Paul talks about this, that you're worshiping demons. Okay, it's just, these false gods are real. Allah is real. He is a real spiritual being. Is he the true God Yahweh? Absolutely not. Okay, there are other gods out there. They're just not the true God. Now, the ancient world understood this much better than we do. Okay, they had lots of gods, didn't they? You had Zeus and the pantheon of the Greek gods. You had all the Egyptian gods. You had all of the Canaanite gods. The gods of the Hittites. They were very comfortable with all of these Elohim because why? They were real, and they did have some kind of power. Okay, they did offer something. Now, did they offer anything that would lead to salvation? No, but they did have some kind of hidden knowledge that they were giving humans. Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into this. Forms of the Hebrew word. Genesis 1. In the beginning, Elohim created the skies and the land. The word Elohim, most common term in Hebrew, Hebrew term for God or deity, is not the only word. Okay, rather than it is a lengthened plural form of the ancient Semitic word for deity, that is El. Have you heard of the god El? Yeah, El. You see this Ba-El. Okay, Baal, as we pronounce it in English. Okay, so it is a Semitic word for God. Sometimes you'll hear him. I've just lost it. Anyway, we'll come back to it. The Semitic word is not a name, but a title that describes the type of being, namely an inhabitant of a spiritual realm. The word occurs in multiple forms in Hebrew. El, the Hebrew word El, is a title meaning deity, and it occurs 235 times in the Hebrew Bible. The problem is, how do we translate the word El? God. How do we translate the word Elohim? God. There's dozens of words that we just translate as God, but they all have a nuanced meaning. The noun derives from the Proto-Semitic verb ual, meaning to be strong. Okay, Elohim to El, to be strong, the leader of the god. The Canaanite text used the word El to refer to a distinct deity who resides on the sacred mountain north of Cana and is the chief of the other gods, the master of their pantheon. Okay, their high god was El. Okay, what was the mountain, by the way? Anybody know?
Sinai.
No, that's
Zion.
God's mountain.
Zion.
No, Zion is God's mountain too.
Hebron.
Horeb,
Horeb.
Mount Horeb. Okay. This is why I firmly believe when Jesus goes up, says the Mount of Transfiguration, it doesn't say which mountain. I think it's Mount Horeb. Okay, I think he's up there on Mount Horeb declaring what? That he is going to overthrow these gods, the gates of hell on Horeb, and they're not going to they're not going to withstand my kingdom. Okay, so when he meets Moses and Elijah up there, he's literally declaring war on the false gods of the Canaanites. We have a tendency to not understand the historical context of a lot of what's going on in the Bible, so it's easy for us to miss these things. She also bears the title Malach or king. Malach El, sometimes you'll hear. And in the Ugaritic text of Northern Canaanite, El is depicted as an aged deity with gray hairs called the father of humanity, or Ab Adam. Okay? You'll find a lot of the ancient gods seem to have their roots in some kind of biblical story. How many gods in the Egyptian pantheon emerged from the Bin stone? Okay, you know what the Bin stone is? No, okay. There was this belief that the ancient gods of the Egyptians were hovering above creation, and as the waters of creation receded, they landed their pyramidal shaped craft called the Bin on top of a mountain, and 8 of them came out. Where have I heard this story? Where have I heard this story? And then all of a sudden, the gods get what? Names, okay? And then you have, Noah and his wife and their children. Well, what happens? One of the children, Horeb, rebels against his father. Gee, I wonder which Hamite that might be. Okay, and so my point is, a lot of these ancient gods are derived from who? The humans. They kind of have, who is their God? Father of humanity, Adam. Oh, who could that be? Well, Adam. Okay, and so you get a lot of this kind of idea that these ancient gods borrow heavily from us. And it makes sense. Who's our favorite God?
Ourselves.
Yeah, the one built in God's image. It's easy to worship ourselves because we're the ones who are made in His image. We're the closest thing we got. All right. The shortest form can also be a plural, have a plural ending, El Amin, meaning deities. This form can be found in the Hebrew Bible as the sons of Elm, okay, referring to the members of God's pantheon, as in Psalm 29 and Psalm 89, verse 7, which refer to the divine council. How often, we hear the word sons of God, and who are we assuming?
I don't know who.
No. Us, right? But that's not necessarily what that means. Okay, the sons of God can mean the followers of these false gods. It can also mean what? The false gods themselves. Okay, so it's really, whoops. Maybe we could shut that off here. Don't walk into the light. Oh, there we go. So we have these. Oh man, that really. Seeing spots now. Really, you can have these false gods. So when we talk about the sons of God, we don't necessarily mean the sons of the right God. Okay, this gets rather confusing, especially in Genesis, where you have the sons of God marrying the daughters of men. Okay, well, who do we assume those sons of God are? Well, those must be Sethites, the lineage of the people who followed Seth. There's only one problem with that interpretation. What is it? Nowhere in the Bible do we refer to the Sethites as the son of God, or the sons of God. And so, who are the sons of God that are breeding with the daughters of men?
Demons?
Could be false gods. Could also be the followers of false gods.
But weren't they without a sexual?
We're going to get into that.
Oh, okay.
We're going to get into that. That's lesson 3, which will be in about 12 months. So, yeah, and so there's all of this like conjecture. Who are these people? What are they? Who is breeding with whom? Kind of thing. We're going to get into that. I will answer your question, but as I always love to tell my children, don't rush the monkey. You'll get a better show. All right. The word El referred to the chief deity of the Canaanite religion. It seems the Israelites adopted this term to describe Yahweh. The El they came to know as the story of Abraham, the Exodus, and the Mount Sinai. This idea is attested to in numerous phrases that are preserved in the old use of El as a proper name. There's El Shaddai. Have you heard that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. the God of Israel. El Eloha, the God of your father. El, the God of your father. El Ahom, El, the God of eternity. El Elohim, the El, the Most High. Yahweh, El Akah, El Kohan. Yahweh, your God, is El of passion. All right, so you have all of these expressions of El that are held over. Then we get into Eloha. Eloha is the alternative short form of El. It is used 57 times in the Hebrew Bible. It means the deity or divine being. This is a composite word made up of two syllables, El and Ha. The phrase is Hebraic for Allah. El Ha, Allah. You think that their God is new? Allah? No, he's the same false God from the past. Allah is a title for Yahweh most frequently used in Job 41 times, along with El 55 times, and Shaddai, meaning powerful one. El Shaddai, the powerful God. Okay,
Did they spell it with an I at the end?
It depends on what translator you have. You know, I'd have to look at the actual Hebrew. Eloha is a synonym with Elohim and other divine beings in Hebrew. They all refer to Yahweh's most often. Notice the parallel between Psalm 18:32. Who is Elohim but Yahweh? Allah but Yahweh, or Samuel. Who is El but Yahweh? So they understood that El, Eloha, Elohim is just the word God, but when you attach it to Yahweh, who do we mean? The one and only high God. You know, the people always ask me, what's your definition of God? Well, he had to build everything. And if your God didn't create everything from nothing, he's not God. Okay, so it's like this is God. He is the high God. Elohim is the word Allah with a plural ending of M. Okay, it's used around 2,750 times in the Hebrew Bible. This is by far the most common term for Yahweh in the Old Testament. By the way, there's a lot of conjecture. Why doesn't Job use that term more? A lot of scholars believe Job is actually the oldest book in the Bible. Like it was written before the others. And so because of the fact the language itself is much less sophisticated than it becomes later. Okay? And so that's kind of the argument. Is it right? Is it wrong? I don't know. Wasn't there. Didn't watch them write it. Okay, but I tend to think it probably is the oldest book in the scriptures, which I find fascinating because remember the Sadducees and the Pharisees. The Sadducees didn't believe that Job was what? Part of the scriptures. Only the Pentateuch. Only the first 5 books of Moses were actually the scriptures. The rest of that is all just literature. And so this is why they didn't believe in a bodily resurrection. Job is pretty plain about the bodily resurrection, isn't he? I know that I will stand and see the Lord in my own flesh. Okay, so it's like my point is, scholars will try to make out the resurrection as a later theology, but yet the oldest book has what? The bodily resurrection.
And my redeemer.
Redeemer, my redemption. It's all talked about in what is widely considered the oldest of all of the scriptures.
Is there something else to point to Job as being the oldest text, other than just simplistic of the simpler language?
Well, it's not simple, it's archaic. Okay, the language is, the way it's formed is older. There's lots of other stuff. It's been so long since I had that class that I'd have to look it up, but there are other references to why that's considered the oldest of the books.
So Job, do we know where Job is in the lineage that goes from Adam down to Jesus?
No.
We don't, okay.
Somewhere between here and there. No, Adam, Jesus, he's in here somewhere, towards the beginning. We don't know. We don't know where he falls in the great picture.
And is Job written by Job?
They believe so. Yeah. I mean, here's the problem. There's so many historical critics that you could get in there and they will tear apart every book. Okay, like Isaiah wasn't written by one guy; it had to be written by 3 guys because of this. But then you read it and you're like, it's pretty consistent, So it just depends. They don't believe Moses wrote all 5 books of the Bible, or 5 books of the Pentateuch. Okay, well, why not? Because surely one man couldn't write it. But then when you read the Hebrew, it's all very consistent. Oh, that's because later scholars smoothed it out. And this is why you have two tellings of creation of man in Genesis 1, 3 and in Genesis 2. And I take it at face value. If the author says it's Job, who do I think wrote it? Job. Okay? I try to take it at face value because otherwise you can drive yourself mad trying to find knowledge that isn't really that important. What's important is, what does Job say? Is this the Bible? Yes. Okay. All right, let's keep going here. Elohim is a technically plural, meaning M is a normal plural ending of a noun and can be used, one, in the plural sense of gods, but it's also referred to as one, the God of Israel. This is like the word moose. Okay, what is the plural form of moose? Mooses. Yeah, no, it's just moose. Okay. Well, this is the problem with this word, is it can be a singular or a plural. So how do you know if it's a singular or plural? Context. Exactly. What is the context of how it's used? Okay. Because you have this, like in Psalm, 89, Elohim sits on judge of the Elohim, and passes judgment on them. Well, is God passing judgment on himself? No. Okay. The word's plural meaning refers to deities worshipped by the nations around Israel. You shall have no other Elohim before me. Okay. Now, I know, how many of you knew that was what was actually said in the commandment, in the first commandment? We would have never thought that because we've always thought Elohim was who? Yahweh, but it's just generic God. The Elohim of Egypt, Exodus 12:12. Foreign Elohim, gods of other nations, 2 Chronicles. Manasseh removed the foreign Elohim. The Israelites sacrificed to demons that are not Elohah. Elohim has not been previously known. Okay, so they were worshiping false gods. Okay, so the word Elohim is there. The plural noun Elohim can also refer to a singular meaning, referring to a single deity worshipped by Israel's neighbors. Shamash, the Elohim of Moab. They usually refer to Yahweh, the God of Israel, Elohim created. So it's all contextual. Okay, just like the video talked about, if I say my mom, I don't mean who?
My mom.
Your mom, right? My mom means my mother, okay? And when I say my God, my Elohim, I mean Yahweh. I don't mean any other Elohim. Which always kind of, I hate it when I hear children say, oh God, it drives me up a wall. Well, take comfort, that's not his name. Okay? Now, they might mean it that way, and you shouldn't do that. But the name is what? Yahweh. Okay? That is the name of our God. All right. It refers to the plural majesty is a grammatical term used by Hebrew scholars to describe how a singular entity is intense or large can be referred to in a plural noun. We also have you ever heard of the expression, the royal we? Mm-hmm. We are not amused, Elizabeth? So, all right. Examples, wisdom, literally wisdoms, call out, singular verb, in the streets, wisdom. In Greek, this is Sophia. You ever heard of the Hagia Sophia? Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's not there anymore, but in Istanbul or Constantinople, there was the great holy wisdom, Hagia Sophia. That's what that means. This use of the plural Elohim to refer to one particular deity who is found in other Canaanite and Mesopotamian cultures, as the Iranian letters, which Pharaoh is addressed by the Canaanite subject as my gods. See the Dictionary of Demons and Deities and the Elohim reference. Okay, so it's this idea that the whole point of this is Elohim can refer to our God, but it can also refer to false gods. Why is that so important? Because we have to remember there are other false gods. And not just false gods we make for ourselves, like money or power or anything like that. There are actual spiritual beings masquerading around as what? God. As a God. Not the God. You know, we don't have a definite article in our language technically, but the is as close as we get. Okay? They're a God, not the God. In 1 Samuel 28, 12 through 13, Saul has a spiritual medium. Do you remember who that is?
Yep.
The Witch of Endor, which I always love because of George Lucas, I can't help but picture them as an Ewok because of the Battle of Endor. Though I know the nerdness is strong in this one. No, so the Witch of Endor conjures up deceased Samuel, and the woman saw Samuel, and she cried out, "I see Elohim rising up from the ground." I see a spiritual being coming up from the ground. Okay, this refers to a human who exists apart from the body. It is not saying Samuel is a god or God, but rather word Elohim apparently refers to a mode of existence, a member of a non-physical spiritual realm. The later biblical authors develop a more sophisticated vocabulary to talk about these beings and to more clearly distinguish them as Elohim and the one Elohim. And that's why in Greek we have angelos, demoniac, what is spirit? Gosh, I just lost it. Pneumos. Okay, so you end up having a lot more words for the Elohim in later languages. Okay. Many Elohims, yet one God. Yahweh is an Elohim, but not the only Elohim, not the only spiritual being. He is the most powerful and authoritative. And he alone is the creator of all things, including the other Elohim. Did God create these other spiritual beings? Yeah, without a doubt. Okay? He is the builder of all these. Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. Elohim, in place of the resident term, the word tells us the proper domain that is for the being. By nature, the God of Israel, the many Elohim of the council, demons, angels, departed humans, dead like Samuel, they part from the spiritual domain that is related to, but distinct from the physical embodied domain. An Elohim is, by definition, the nature of a disembodied entity, so the word can refer to many different beings who inhabit that realm. Okay? Any spiritual being is a what? Including us when we're separated from the body. Okay? In Hebrew terms. Deuteronomy. For Yahweh, your Elohim, is the Elohim of Elohim. He's the God of gods. He is the Lord of lords and the great and mighty and awesome. So, what is Moses acknowledging there in Deuteronomy?
That there are more than one God.
More than one God, but they're not who? The God, your Elohim. Our God is the God of gods. How do we know our God is the God of gods? He brought judgment on the other Elohim when he decimated Egypt during the Exodus. Okay, wiped it out. They, the Israelites, sacrificed to demons. They are not Elohim that they had not previously known. So they're upset the gods are sacrificing to who?
Other gods.
False gods, yeah. Therefore, concerning the eating of things, this is in Corinthians, sacrificed to idols, we know there is no such thing as idols in the world, and that there is no God but one. For even if they are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed are the many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom all things, and we exist from him, and the one Lord Jesus Christ, by whom all things and we exist through him. So in other words, Paul was writing the Corinthians why. What was happening is, where did you get your meat in the first century? From temples. Okay? The people would bring sacrifices to the temples, the temple priests would butcher them, and they would resell the meat. That was how the temples made money. By the way, for all of you who think selling fireworks is disgusting, ugh, let's be butchers, all right? So they're gonna resell the meat. Well, what happened was you had people who had come out of that pagan world who would still do what? Go there and buy the meat. Go buy meat for dinner at the temple. Or they would go close a business deal. That was a very common thing. There was a restaurant normally at the temple, and you would go and do what? That's how you would close a business deal, is you'd have dinner at the fanciest restaurant in town, Red Lobster. And so, call back to the sermon for you all.
So turn the lights out.
But that scarred me as a child. So anyway, go watch today's sermon if you missed the reference. So it's this idea that there are other gods, and this meat is truly being sacrificed to them. But people were getting puffed up because they said, "What? I can eat that meat because I know they're not the true God." But what was the problem with people just coming out of that tradition?
They were still being influenced by it.
They were being offended by the people who knew they weren't really getting meat to the true God. Okay? And so, in other words, if it offends my brother, I refrain from it, is the point. If worshiping these other false gods causes them, or going into these places of these other false gods causes them offense, don't do it. Why?
They drag them away.
You drag them away, yeah. Oh, when Paul says there is no such thing as an idol, he is referring to the statue itself, not the Elohim. This is something I think we really have to get into our heads. They weren't worshiping the statue. Okay, people think, oh, well, the statue of Zeus, they were worshiping this carved entity. No, the statue of Zeus was just a what? Representation. Just like I'm not actually worshiping a cross. When we go into a church, what am I worshiping?
Jesus.
The cross the God that cross represents. Okay? And the same was true in the ancient world. There were lots of statues of Zeus. It wasn't like there was only one. And lots of statues of Athena. Now, did they believe that the statue of Zeus became inhabited by a god?
Yes.
Yes, if the offering was correct. If you did things rightly, that God might temporarily take up residence in that statue. Okay? And so they actually believed that they could commune with the God or talk to the God if the God so deemed. Which I find fascinating because I'm looking at a cross and I'm saying Jesus is there. Where else is he? Everywhere. But their gods, do they have the ability to be everywhere at one time? No, isn't that interesting?
How would they know he's actually there, though?
He would speak.
Oh, he would speak.
And in fact, there's so many really crazy things the priests would do to make people convinced they were hearing the God.
It's like the Wizard of Oz.
Yes, seriously. There was like, on some of these altars, they found these giant echo chambers underneath of them. So one man talking, it sounded booming. Coming out of the God, all that, and all this kind of crazy stuff. And they had these little fountain or a little thing where you can make an offering, and there was this little bird. And if the bird tweeted, that meant that the God heard your prayer. But it turned out there was this little string that like ran over to the priest, and it would yank on the bird, and it would tweet, kind of thing. And so it really was. It was very deceptive. And in fact, my favorite one of these was, I think it was in Alexandria, I can't remember the exact place for the temple. They found that the doors, for the deity, were steam powered. And if you offered enough sacrifice on the brazier out front, it would heat up pipes that ran underneath the brazier, and over time the door would slowly open as the steam would compress enough to open the door. And then when it reached its pinnacle, they had put a trumpet so it would make the sound of a trumpet blast. So it was like, and it would open up, and you're like, whoa, cool. Think about the primitives. Did they see this kind of technology?
Oh, it's amazing.
It's amazing. It's God. I always think you ever seen the movie Gods Must Be Crazy?
Yes.
When they find this glass thing and they don't, But, get any primitive with a sophisticated enough technology, you can appear to be what? God. If I could somehow go back in the ancient world and be like, look, I stole your soul by taking your picture. I mean, it's really, Anyway, sorry. Free aside. And so you have this idea of God, many gods. Monotheism versus polytheism. The biblical portrait of a populated spiritual universe is sometimes thought to contradict the concept of monotheism, the belief that there is only one God. All right. The problem is our English word God, capital G, lowercase g, which has two meanings. Okay. Capital G refers to the one all-powerful creator deity, referring in Arabic religious traditions of Judaism and Christianity and Islam. Okay, they believe in God, or God with a lowercase g, referring to a deity of a lesser status or power. So, are we monotheist?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. We have one God. Okay. The real problem is that English speakers often use the one word God to refer to both these spiritual beings. Well, the distinction between the Creator God and all other gods is maintained by the spelling convention of the capital of and lowercase, and it can still be confusing. Why? Can you see if I've capitalized the word when I'm talking to you?
No.
No. This is why I always add the word what? False. Okay, when I'm referring to these other gods, false gods, I always add the word false, so you'll know who I'm talking about. I read that. For the biblical author, there is no tension in calling Yahweh the Creator and Elohim, while also using the word to describe spiritual beings that were created by Yahweh. They are all Elohim, that is, inhabitants of the spiritual realm. And some people mistake the biblical idea that there are many Elohim as a concept of polytheism. In fact, you see this a lot of times. Religious scholars say, see, they were polytheist and monotheism did what? Evolved in the Hebrews. They actually worshipped a lot of gods, but it evolved over time to become the one God. No, they just don't understand Hebrew, okay? It wasn't that the idea of a one God took some kind of evolutionary timeline. All right? It just happened. There was one God, and there were also many other Elohim. In the academic religious studies, polytheism refers to a religious worldview and belief that the spiritual realm of many deities rival one another in status and power. Think of the classic pantheon of the Greek gods on Mount Olympus. This is not the same as biblical monotheism, which claims the only Yahweh is creator and ruler of all things, including the other Elohim. You, Yahweh, are most high alone over all the land. You are exalted above all Elohim, which is very interesting because how many of the other creation accounts in these other religions is anything out of nothing? They're all out of pre-existing matter. Whenever their gods create, they're doing what?
Just
taking what's there and recreating it. Okay? It's this idea that they are not creators from, as the biblical Latin would say, ex nihilo, out of a nothing. Okay? All the other gods create out of pre-existing matter. Okay? And so, why is that? Because they're not who? Elohim. They're not the true God, Yahweh.
Technically, nobody creates.
No, we're all recreators.
Right.
You know, I mean, even artists aren't really creators. They're what? I'm taking something that already exists, and I always love that. I'll close with the joke of the day here. All right, this engineer dies and he gets to heaven, or this chemist dies and he gets to heaven. And he says, "God, we don't need you anymore." God says, "What do you mean you don't need me?" He goes, "Well, we've learned through science that we can make anything. I can create life. I can take amino acids, I can do this, and I can synthesize that, and I can create life." God says, "Show me." The guy says, "Well, I'm going to get some of this over here." And he goes, No. Get your own elements. All right. Anyway, all right. Any thoughts or questions on any of that?
I just had a quick question about, like when Jesus went on the cross,
Mhm.
he said, Eloi, or is it Eloi?
Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah, that's
Elohim, if it would have been in Hebrew, it would have been Elohim, Elohim.
Okay, yeah.
But it's in
I
there.
didn't see that on here, I was just kind of curious if
That's because that's Aramaic.
there's just lots of different.
Semitic languages kind of, they had a lot of cross-pollination and things like that, but by the time of Jesus, that Hebrew wasn't the common tongue. Okay, Hebrew was used amongst the scholar, but most people spoke Aramaic, which was a form of a Semitic language from Canaanite, from Hebrew, from Mesopotamian, and all the other area. Okay.
And then after that, then someone say he's calling Elijah.
Yeah, because they misunderstood
They
Eli.
thought he was
Eli.
spiritual being,
And well, think about this: what is Elijah? God elevator or whatever. And so
Yeah.
it's like, now I'm trying to remember what Elijah means. But it's El. You know, you'll see
Yeah,
El
yeah.
worked into a lot of the ancient Hebrew names because why? They love God.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you see it in Greek too. What does Theophilus mean? God lover.
Oh, okay.
So when Luke is writing his letters, he goes, "Oh Theophilus, oh God lover," and a lot of people said, "Oh, he wasn't really writing to a person." But guess what? There are people called Theophilus by the time of Luke. So yeah,
You mentioned the Endor as a god that had some evidence.
the witch of Endor.
And
It's a city.
Okay.
And
But there was evidence that there was another being within that story.
Yeah, I mean Samuel.
Okay. What I'm trying to understand is what evidence do we have that there are other Elohim?
Well, I think first of all you have the biblical reference.
Well,
To all that.
but I mean, here's the deal. My brother's family, you met
Sure.
his son last night. When my two brothers died, they prayed to 6, 8, 12 different gods.
Yeah.
What evidence do we have that there are other Elohim?
I just the biblical reference that
Yeah.
people worship these other gods. Okay, was your brother praying to other deities?
They all do up there.
They do.
in that community, and I'm just, I always thought there's one God and that's it. And
There is
so
one.
You've shed a new light today
Well,
on this.
see, this is
if they're praying, there is some evidence for other gods.
Yeah, they are praying to other gods. I mean, this is the problem. We are quick to dismiss them as gods, right? Because we're dismissing them as who?
Satan.
No, we're dismissing them as Yahweh. Okay, we're saying, oh, they're not Yahweh, so they're not really worshiping God.
I dismiss them as make-believe.
Right, but they're not.
Demons.
These demons and things can influence and inhabit and all of this kind of stuff. And so, yes, there are false gods out there. And to discredit them as figments of imagination or just kind of deluded mind is very dangerous.
Okay.
Because the demons can certainly do what? Deceive and influence.
Well, that's,
I
certainly we learned that in Screwtape, didn't we?
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, after listening to pastors from Madagascar who are dealing with a lot of demonic possession and these ancient gods that were, left over, they're real. There are real spiritual beings out there seeking the demise and to draw the worship away from who? Yahweh. Okay. Why are they trying to do this? They want your soul. They want you. This, and we're going to get into this where God puts the watchers over the people, and and then the watchers like getting the praise of Yahweh, so they draw people away, and what was the goal of the Canaanite gods? It was always to do what to the Israelites? Pull them away from the worship of Yahweh. Okay, they like the worship of man. They like the deception. Yeah.
Can we tell if the witch of Endor really conjured Samuel, or was that in fact a demon?
Well, there's so much conjecture about that. Was it a demon? Was it Samuel? Was it whatever? I can't definitively say one way or another. I will say she conjured something. Because why? She shocked herself. Remember, she was shocked because most of her thing was a sham, wasn't it? But all of a sudden, when a real Elohim, a real spiritual being showed up, she's what? Freaked out. Okay, I always think about that with these modern day sorcerers, fortune tellers and witches and all this. One of these days they're going to really go nuts. Yeah, go ahead.
Did your relative, or do your relatives think that the Elohim that they pray to are on the same level as Yahweh?
Well, I would say yes, because at these funerals, my two brothers, and that's the only time we really worshiped with them. They list a whole series of gods.
They're all people that live. Jesus, and then there's 5 total.
Swami,
Jesus is one of them. They're all people. They're all great meditators.
Yeah.
So they do believe in one God. I want to correct you on that.
But they don't list him number one. If you listen to their prayers.
Well, Jesus was just listed as one of
They
many.
do.
So.
Well, listen, I hate to cut this short, but I see little kids poking their head up through the window.
No,
We'll discuss this at lunch.
All right.
yeah.
All right, I'm going to end the video. All right, let's close with a word of prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever.